Hello, this is Andres from New Mexico Rocketry Reviews, and if you don't know, in the past we have built a wireless launch pad from drone parts, and today we're going to show you how to build one. Alright, so the version we're going to be building in this video is not going to have continuity, and the reason for that is because to add continuity, it's going to add a lot of cost in terms of the parts, such as more receiver controlled switches and things like that. However, in the future we are going to make a video that will have continuity. So if you want to have continuity in yours, make sure you wait till the next video. So I just want to let you guys know that if you do not already have an FrSky radio, this may end up costing more than another wireless launch solution may cost just because the radio is very expensive. However, if you already have an FrSky radio and you want to make a wireless launch pad, this could definitely help save you money. And just to be clear, this version will not have a continuity checker. So if you want a continuity checker, make sure you wait for the next video because that one will. And to make sure you see that video, make sure you subscribe. Because once we hit our goal of 100 subscribers, we will be making a weather balloon series. So stay tuned for that. Alright, so here are some additional features this Launchpad has. It has super long range, just because it is made from drone parts, and it also has a voltage reading that you can look at on your remote controller. So that way you can tell if your Launchpad is running low on battery without having to use a voltage meter to measure each of the batteries. You can just look right on your remote controller. So let's take a look at the safety features of this model rocket test stand. So first of all, it follows all NAR guidelines, so it is completely legal to use. In addition, you have to press a button to turn it on, so no accidental launches, and it also has an LED to indicate if it is turned on or not. Also, if the remote controller is switched off, however the launch pad is on, it will not accidentally launch because it is set up so that if it fail-safes or disconnects, it will set it so it will not put voltage through the plugs. Alright, so here are the materials that you're going to need to build this launch pad. So first of all, you're going to need an FrSky brand radio. We have a QX7 model, but if you have something like a QX9, that will also work. You will also need an FrSky receiver. We have an RX4R, but anything else with 4 channels will also work. You'll also need a Turnigy receiver controlled switch, some launch wires, so if you have an old launch controller, you can just cut the wires off of that. You'll also need a button to turn it on and off, an LED to see if it's on or off, and you'll also need 4 9-volt connectors and 4 9-volt batteries to power it. And the links will be in the description for all of these things. Alright, so there's just one thing I wanted to mention quick about compatibility between the remote controller and the receiver. The remote controller we are using is the QX7, and it is an older model and it uses a ACCST protocol. And the receiver we're using, the RX4R, also has the ACCST protocol, and that's why they work together. So if you're using a newer remote controller that uses the newer ACCESS protocol, the Access protocol, you need to make sure that you buy a receiver with it that also uses the Access protocol. This is very important or it may not work. And this also means that if you have a different remote controller, the steps for pairing and binding and setting up the remote controller may be a bit different, so just keep that in mind. Alright, so as you can see here, we have our receiver and we have our receiver controlled switch. And this part of this process may vary depending on if you have a different receiver, so you may have to check your manual for that. So you can see here that we have a little plug that connects our receiver, and we have a little thing of wires here too. And what we're gonna do is on this little wire thing, there is a black and a red wire, and those are the only 2 wires we're going to be needing, because all the other ones are for things like S-Bus that you may need for drones and things of such, but we only really need to power it. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to remove all of the other wires except for the black and the red wires. So the way we do that is we kind of use something like an X-Acto knife to lift the tab, and then we can just pull them out. And if you don't want to go through this process, you can always also just cut the wires. So. Alright, so here we go. Now you can see, here, one sec, let's get that to focus. Then we have you can see we have all the wires stripped and removed except for the red and the black wires. So now we can just go ahead on our receiver, we can just go ahead and plug that in, right? Just how it aligns, and it only goes in one way, so make sure you put that in correctly. Then the other thing is we have this turnkey receiver controlled switch here, as you can see, and now we're gonna have to plug this in as well. So you can see from this angle you have the brown wire. You want the brown wire on the inside, and you want to plug it in on the bottom row just like that. So let me put that up closer so you guys can see. Hey guys, me from the future here, and I noticed that earlier in the video I actually wired this wrong. So you can see this is the way that I told you guys to wire it. That's actually incorrect. You actually have to just unplug it and then just plug it in just one higher, so that it looks like that instead. It's just kind of the same thing but one level up. To get a better view, I'll put it closer to the camera, and that's what it should look like. Alright, so as you can see here, guys, we have some launch clips. We just cut this off of a normal wired launch controller. As you can see, the clips are in pretty rough shape because we've done other launches with them, but as you can see here, we have the two clips, but the ends we're going to be worrying about right now are these two ends right here, and these are what we're going to be soldering right here. That's what we're going to be soldering. So first thing we're going to do is we're only going to solder one of them for the time being, but we're going to strip the wire, use a wire stripper to expose the wire ends, right? Just like that. I'm going to strip a little bit more off of this one. Alright, so for now we're only going to be soldering one of these ends. So we're going to solder one of them to the turnkey receiver controlled switch wire. And just to be clear, it doesn't matter which of these two red wires you solder, they both are the same. So I'm just going to cut this end off because I don't really like the soldering end right here. And we're going to strip this one as well. There we go. So as you can see, now we have this end stripped. And typically the way I like to solder my wires, a lot of people, this is kind of like my own little trick, is I often like to kind of twist them around sometimes just to help them connect a little bit better, but that's really not too important for here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on one of these here. And I'm going to put a little solder on the other one as well. Or, sorry guys, I did that out of frame. Alright, so once you got a pretty good amount of solder on both of them, you can just kind of... Oh yeah, the other thing is I often recommend using heat shrink. So, for example, we're going to grab some heat shrink right here. It's just like a little tube, and it comes in different colors. This one's red, which makes sense because we have a red wire. I'm just going to cut this so it's not too big. And I'm just going to slide it down one of the ends of the wires. Alright? And now we're just going to solder it here. I often like to use a little bit of tape just to make it a little bit easier. That way you don't have to worry about one of the wires moving while you solder the other one. And if you have a little bit of difficulty soldering, I would just Google up a soldering tutorial. Soldering is not an easy thing. It requires a little bit of experience and practice to become experienced at, and yeah. These wires don't really want to connect so much. I'm actually going to put a little bit more solder onto this wire. And there we go. Now, as you can see, we have, as you can see here, we have one of the, apologize, let me see if I can get that in focus for you guys. You can see we have one of the wires from the turnkey receiver controlled switch connected to one of the wires from the launch clips. So yeah, that's one of the first steps. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start wiring together all of our positive inputs. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to first start wiring up our 3 9-volt connectors here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to strip the wires, but we're going to try to leave pretty good amount. We're going to try to leave pretty good amount of wire. We want to strip quite a bit off, and I'll show you guys why in a sec. So we're just going to strip all of the red off of our 9-volt connectors. As you can see, I have 3 here. We've found that you need a pretty good amount in order for the launch to work well. And we've found if you don't have enough, it'll either take a long time to launch or there won't be enough power. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take our 3 9-volts right here, and you can see we have 3 red wires, and this is the 9-volt connectors we have here. And now we're just going to twist them together, just like so. We're just going to twist them. And now, as you can see here, we have them kind of twisted together, and that's going to make it easier to solder in a moment. So the other wires we're going to have to connect are, we're going to also connect the other red wire on our turnkey receiver controlled switch. That's the other red wire we're going to be connecting. Or rather, I should say one of the other red wires, because we're also going to connect the red wire on this receiver here. This receiver also has a red wire coming out. We're also going to solder that here. And we're also going to solder our LED on here. So we have an LED, and it has a white and a black wire. If you have an LED, it may have like red and black. But this is the equivalent of the red, this white. So we're going to solder that on as well. And with thin wires, I often just use my fingernails to strip it. I find that to be easier. And we're also going to grab a bit of heat shrink. I recommend getting a bit of a bigger size tube of heat shrink because we're going to have quite a bit of wires here. So I'm just going to cut off a piece here. Alright, so let's start twisting the other wires in here. So let's take the turnkey receiver controlled switch wire, the red wire, the one that we haven't already soldered yet, and let's just kind of twist that around. Maybe a bit difficult. You may have to kind of fidget with it a little bit until you can get it to work well. There we go. We have something pretty good right there. Now let's take this other red wire from our receiver, twist that around as well. Actually, that's a bit short, so I'm actually gonna strip a bit more off of this wire. There we go. That should help a little bit. And there we go. So now we have that wire. And the last one we need to connect is our LED. So as you can see here, we have the white wire, and we're just gonna twist that around just like we did on the other one. And actually, I forgot to do the heat shrink, so we're gonna actually have to undo this, put our heat shrink on, and twist these wires back on. My apologies, guys. And now, once we have all the wires connected, and just for clarity, the wires we have connected are the 3 red wires coming from our 9-volt connectors, the red or the positive wire coming from our LED here. We also have the red wire coming from our receiver, which is the RX4R. And finally, we also have the red wire from the Turnigy receiver controlled switch. So, once we have all those wires, we're going to turn on our soldering iron, let it heat up for a second, and we're just going to put a bunch of solder on there. Just put a whole lot, because we want a nice, good connection. And obviously, once we're done with that, we'll slide the heat shrink and use a hot source. Like, I like to use a lighter to shrink my heat shrink, and just shrink it to prevent other electrical components connecting with it and causing problems. So this soldering iron may need to heat up a bit more. Starting to heat up. So, yeah. If you don't really know how to solder very well, I would suggest searching up a tutorial, and realistically, solder just takes a bit of practice and experience. It's not really an easy thing to do. It's pretty tough. So let that heat up there. There we go. Now it's starting to heat up a bit more. My apologies. It's pretty hot. And I think that's pretty good, so then we can just slide the heat shrink on, and then you can apply a hot source to shrink this heat shrink. Alright, so now we're going to start soldering our negative terminals. So we're going to take our 3 black wires coming from our 9-volt connectors. We're just going to do the same thing that we did for the other ones, and we're just going to strip them, but leave a pretty good amount of room and strip quite a bit off, so we have a lot of wire exposed. But not too much, like maybe about a couple centimeters or something like that. Oh. Alright, there we go. So once we have those 3 coming from our 9-volt connectors, we're just going to put them together, same thing as before. And we don't really need to twist them much, because what we're going to do instead is we're going to stick them through the hole that we have in our button here. So this is just a little button. This is how we're going to turn our remote control on and off. And so those are the only 3 wires we're going to connect to one end of the button. So once we have those 3 wires connected to the button, we can just go ahead and start putting some solder on it to help it become a slightly bit of a stronger connection. And tape is really quite useful when you're doing this, because sometimes it's helpful at preventing things from moving around when you don't want them to move around. And this tape is pretty dead, so I'm gonna grab a new piece. And there we go. As you can see, we have a pretty good amount of solder there, and we have a nice little connection from our 3 wires on the 9-volt connectors to one end of the button. And I also recommend putting some hot glue on top of this to prevent it from touching other wires and having a conductive surface. You know, we'll have a nice insulator because hot glue is a great insulator. And so next, we're gonna need to solder wires to the other part of the button. So first wire we're gonna connect to the other end of the button is the black wire on our receiver, the black wire coming from our receiver, because we want to power our receiver. And so we can just put that around the button hole. It's quite convenient that this button we have here has a hole in it because it makes it very easy to attach wires. And the next wire we're going to connect is the black wire coming from our LED. Once again, very important because this is going to be our status indicator for an easy way to tell if your wireless Launchpad is on or off. So that way when you press the button, the LED will turn on. Alright, so we have the black wire coming from our receiver and the black wire coming from our LED. However, now we have to connect the other wire that is coming from the launch clips. So we have 2 wires coming from the launch clips, which is what you are obviously going to hook up to your rocket. And so one wire is connected to the Turnigy receiver controlled switch, and the second one is going to be connected to the ground. So yeah. So there we go. We're just going to twist that in just like we've been connecting the other ones. And we want to make sure to connect it to the right one. We don't want to put it through the wrong thing on the button. So there we go. We have that wire on there. And once again, we're going to do exactly the same thing that we have done for our other one, which is we are going to put a bit of solder on there, and yeah. And once we solder this, we will be completely done with the wiring of our wireless Launchpad. So once we're done with soldering this, the next step will be to bind the receiver to the remote controller and to configure the remote controller or program it so that it works correctly. Alright, so as you can see here, we have our wiring here and we have a battery plugged into one of them. You won't need to connect all 3 right now because we're not going to be doing any launching. So we're going to press the button to turn it on, alright? And as you can see, that'll make the LED turn on. And if the LED isn't turned off, the wiring must have been done wrong in some way. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to turn it off for a minute, and now we're going to start doing stuff on our remote control. So as you can see, I have already turned it on. To turn it on, you just hold the power button until it starts making noises and things like that. And so we're going to make a new model. I already have a model here, but we're going to make a new one. So we need to press this button here with the 3 lines, and then it's going to give you a model list. So if you have a new remote controller, you probably will have no models here. But I'm just going to use this dial. If you guys obviously have a new remote controller, these will be empty, and you can do it on number 1. But I'm going to scroll down, and I'm just going to make a new one on number 7 because that's empty. And I'm just going to click the button on number 7, and it's going to say create or restore model. I'm going to click create model, and it's going to say loading model, and it's going to ask you to select the model type, and we don't really need to say, so we're just going to click exit. So it's going to give it a name, Model 07, so we're going to click it again. And it seems like we have that model selected. It'll say backup, copy, or move, so we're going to click exit again because we don't want to do any of those things. And so next, we're going to click page to go to the next page. And here we have a model name, and we're going to want to name this just so we know which model it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and name mine. Alright, so as you can see there, I named it wireless. So once we finish typing in, we click the exit button, and now we can start scrolling down. And most of this stuff is not important, so just keep scrolling and keep scrolling down, and use this dial to scroll down, and you can just ignore all this stuff. And here we have something called switch warnings, and what this is going to do is this is going to give you an alert when any of the switches are switched to the on position when you turn the remote control on. And we are not going to need any of these during this wireless thing, so we're just gonna, you just click them, and if there's no arrow next to them, that means you've turned them off, and we don't need any of them, so we just turn them all off. So keep scrolling down, and here's where we need things start getting important. So as you can see here, this thing says internal RF, and that's very important that it says internal. And right here it'll say mode, and you can change this from off to D16 to D8, and among other settings, we want to set it at D16. Very important. We do not need to change the channel range. And then RX number, we don't need to change that. And you'll see there's a bind here. So now we need to start doing some other stuff before we click bind. So I'm going to move this remote controller to the side. And as you can see here, on your receiver, you probably can't see it on camera, but there is a very, very small button in here. And if you have an RX4R, you should be able to see it. And you need to use something like a pin or an X-Acto knife to be able to press this. So what you're going to do is you're going to use a pin or X-Acto knife or something like that to hold it down. You're going to have that held down, and while you're holding the button down, you want to turn this on. And what this means is, since we were holding the button while it was in holding the bind button while we turned it on, we've put it into binding mode, and that's exactly what we want to do. So now, back on our remote controller, there's a little BND thing. You want to go over there and click on it, and just go ahead and put it to channel 1 through 8, telemetry on, telem on, and just click that. And now the remote controller will start making a beeping noise, and the LEDs should have changed on your receiver. So now we're just going to click exit, and it should be binded. Now, to be sure, we want to take it out of binding mode. So what we're going to do is we're going to press the button to turn it off, and we're going to turn it back on. And now the LED on the receiver has turned green, and I pressed exit to go to the main menu, and you can see little bars there, which means that we have successfully bound the receiver to the remote controller, and they are now paired. Alright, so what we're going to do next is we're going to set something called a failsafe. And a failsafe is basically where if the remote controller loses connection or disconnects for whatever reason from the receiver, it's going to make sure that when it does that, this thing is not going to launch a rocket when there is no connection. And that is very important, because if you have a disconnection, you do not want the rocket to launch. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the 3 little lines again. We're going to click there. Go down, click on our wireless model that we've made. And we just need to, if you don't see a menu like this, you should have your model selected. But for me, I need to click select model. And it's going to say failsafe not set, and that's what we're going to do right now. So that's great. So we're going to click page again, go over to this page. We're going to scroll all the way down, and keep scrolling down, and you'll see failsafe here. It says failsafe, and it says not set. We're going to change it to custom. Alright? And so custom, and then once we've set it to custom, we're going to go over to set, click enter, and you'll see the failsafe settings. So all we need to do is go to channel 1 and put channel 1 all the way. We just click on channel 1 and scroll it all the way to -100. And once we've set channel 1 to -100, we're all good. We've set our failsafe successfully. Alright, so our next step is we are now going to be setting up the settings so that we can hold these 2 switches just like this in order to initiate the launch sequence. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on the three line button here, and we're going to click page until we go over to inputs. And what we're going to need to do here is we're going to hold down the button, and at the bottom you can scroll down, it says delete, and you're just going to delete it. We can do this for the rest of these. We do not need any of these. We're just going to delete all of them. Just delete them all. And page over to the next one, 6 out of 12, the mixer. We're going to do the exact same thing. Hold down and scroll down to delete. And just do this for all of the channels. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to page over until we get to 9 out of 12, which is logical switches. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to make a logic switch that only becomes true when we're holding down these two switches just like this. So what we're going to do is go to L01, click on it, and it should say edit. We're going to click edit, and for function we're going to put A is less than X. You can just scroll through. We want it to A is less than X. Alright? And then for this one, we are going to put it to rudder right here. And the rudder is just going to be this one. And we're going to put V2, which is the value. And we're going to put that to -95. Alright, so now the next thing you want to do is we're going to click on the AND switch function. And we want it to be this switch. So we're just going to click this switch at the top, because this is the temporary switch on this remote controller, because it automatically goes back down when you let it go. And if you flick the switch and it says, and the arrow is up, you need to flick it again, because the arrow needs to be pointing down. That is very important. So now, as you can see, the bold text here at the top, will become bold only when you're holding both switches. So if I click just this one, nothing happens. Just this one, nothing happens. But when I do both, it becomes bold, which means we have done a good job. And so now we click exit right here, and until we go back to here, and we're going to hold the page button to go back a page, and we're going to go back to inputs. And on input number one, we're just going to click here, and it's going to open us up a new input. And it'll say input name and source, and the only one we really need to change is source. So source, we are going to change that. We're just going to scroll through until we find logic switch number 1, which is L01. So we should find that eventually. I probably passed it. Yeah, my apologies. So let's see. There it is. Logic switch number 1, L01. So that's the one we want to set. And then we can just click exit. And the next thing we want to do is we want to page over to mixer, and we're going to click on channel 1 once again. And that's just going to create a mixer, and it will say source number 1. So then we can just click exit. And now we should have it wired up successfully. So now we can go ahead and test it. Alright, so now your wireless Launchpad is basically finished, and it will work perfectly fine if you use it now. However, we want to show you how to do a couple other things that are just nice to have on the Launchpad. So first thing I'm going to show you how to do is I'm going to show you how to make it beep whenever you do the launch sequence. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to click this button again, and then we're going to page all the way over to 10 out of 12, which is the special function. So now we're going to click here, and we're going to cycle through until we find the logical switch number 1, which is obviously the logical switch we used to initiate the launch. So there we have it, and then we're going to click enter to do that. And then here, it probably won't say play track for you. It may say something else. But you'll just want to scroll through, and you want to find play sound. So once you have play sound, you're going to click here, and you can cycle through the different sounds. Personally, I like warning 1. So to test it out, you can just do the switches. And for example, if you don't like that, you can go ahead and change it and see what the other ones sound like. But personally, I like warning 1, so I'm going to set it as that. So that is how you set it to beep when you do that. Alright, so now what I'm going to show you guys how to do is I'm going to show you guys how to make your remote controller beep whenever your wireless launch pad starts running out of battery. So first thing we need to do is we need to set it up so that the remote controller knows the voltage of the wireless launch pad. So we're going to click page again to telemetry, and what we're going to do now is, because our receiver and remote controller are compatible with telemetry, we're going to click discover new sensors. So we just click discover new sensors, and a bunch of things are going to start popping up here. So, and then we can look at all our new sensors. So then we want to click stop discovery, and you can see we have a bunch of sensors here. So the first one is A2. This one we just want to ignore. This one is not important. The next one is RSSI, and this is actually the signal strength between the receiver and the remote controller. So if this number is high, like 90, there is a strong connection between the receiver, but if it starts getting lower, like 50 or 40, the connection is not as strong. And this one is the one we want. This is the important one. This is RXBT. That's the battery of the receiver, and as you can see, it says 7.3 volts, which sounds about right because I have a fairly depleted 9 volt plugged into it right now, off frame. So now that we have that discovered, we're going to page back. We're just going to hold the page button to go back a page, and we want to go to logical switches once again. So now we're going to click edit on logical switch number 2. Function, we're going to put it to A is less than X. And then for V1, we're going to scroll through, and eventually we will find our RX battery. So we just have to scroll through to find that. May take a while because there's a lot of things you have in here. And here we have it. We have RX battery. So, and then once we found RX battery, we want to find the voltage that we want it to tell it when our voltage is low. So you can really set this to whatever you want. I kind of like to have it at like about 7 volts, I think is about good. And yeah, so now what happens is this logical switch will become true if our RX battery goes below 7 volts. So now that we have that true, we need to make it to do something when this happens. So we're going to page over once again to special functions. And we're kind of going to do the same thing as the last one. We're going to go here and go to logical switch number 2. There it is, logical switch number 2. And once again, we're going to go here, and we're going to scroll through until we find play sound. And then we can have a bunch of different sounds. You can set it to whatever you want. I'm going to set it to beep 2. You can put it to whatever you want. You can obviously use the other one, the logical switch number 1, to test out which beeps you like. And then over here, we can set how long you'll wait before it beeps again. So, for example, if I set this to 30, it's going to beep every 30 seconds whenever logical 2 is true. So essentially whenever the wireless launch pad is below 7 volts, if it's below 7 volts, it will beep every 30 seconds. So that's about it. Alright, so I know this was a very long and complex tutorial, so if you have any questions, or if you're having problems with something or any other difficulties, just let us know in the comments and we will make sure to reply. Also, check out our website for more stuff about what we're doing here at New Mexico Rocketry Reviews. Also, check out our Patreon if you want to support us, and also check out our Facebook. Other than that, have a great day.